We are organizing, as usual, this breakfast in collaboration with a number of partners. So I want to welcome you not only on behalf of Accenture, but also on behalf of the partners that are organizing this breakfast today. And that we've been organizing breakfasts and other events with through the years here at the World Economic Forum. Because, as you know, we are a little bit on an agenda to progress the LGBT subject in the World Economic Forum. Not just because of the World Economic Forum, because we think it's a very important subject to be discussed here in Davos, to trickle down then into the homes and offices and government buildings of all the people who are here out there. So our partners, Microsoft, EY, Thomson Reuters, Lloyd, Salesforce, Deutsche Bank, HRC, MasterCard, Dow and Linklaters, all companies who are very committed to progressing the LGBT agenda. We're going to have a great panel. I'm going to introduce them later to you. This year's focus will be inclusiveness of cities when it comes to LGBT. And Open for Business has done some research on the inclusiveness of cities. They've even come with a rating for cities on LGBT inclusiveness. The reports are out there. You can all see that. A few words on Open for Business, and I'm going to read this. Open for Business is a coalition of global companies making the case that inclusive, diverse societies are better for business and therefore essential for economic growth. We have 24 of the world's leading companies, and just this week we have Deutsche Bank, Kim, thank you very much, signing up. And earlier this month we had GSK, RELX and KPMG also joining up as members. I'm going to open the stage now for John Miller. John, where are you? To say a few words about the phenomenal research. I think I would all encourage you to read it. It is a very solid piece of work making a real case. John?
Thank you very much, Sandra, and hello everybody. It's really wonderful to be here. Open for Business, as Sandra says, exists to promote the economic case for LGBT inclusion worldwide. And we do that by presenting the data that open, inclusive, diverse societies are better for business and better for economic growth. And today we published our first report in 2015, and that laid out the economic case on 3 levels. So first of all, presenting all the data that individual performance is improved when people are working in open and inclusive environments. And interestingly, that's not just LGBT individuals. The performance of all individuals working in an inclusive environment is lifted. The second level is the business case. So the evidence that company level performance improves alongside LGBT inclusion. And so that's things like attracting and retaining talent, brand strength, customer preference, but also financial measures like things like the cost of capital, return on equity, share price performance, all correlate with LGBT inclusion. And then finally, at the sort of top level, we have the economic case. So this is looking at various different macroeconomic indicators and looking at how they move alongside inclusion. And so that really was the first report that we published. When we were putting this together, when we were looking at the economic aspects, we kept noticing some really interesting connections between economic performance at an urban level, at a city level, and inclusion. So things like clusters of creative industries and high-value service industries and levels of entrepreneurialism, and people wanting to move to a city, people wanting to visit cities, lots of different metrics, lots of different indicators. And so we thought that's got to be worth exploring further, and so we did. And so the second report leads with cities. So you could think of it as almost the economic case for LGBT inclusion in cities. And so we pulled together lots of those metrics. This is just one of a whole bunch of different correlations that we present in the report. It shows the connection between LGBT inclusion in a city and GDP per capita. And there's a very clear correlation. And there are about a dozen similar charts to this. I'm not going to fire them all at you. We dug into this. What's driving this connection, do we think? And there are several drivers which we identify in the report. 3 ones I want to mention quickly now. One is innovation. It turns out that those cities that are most LGBT inclusive are also the most innovative cities on a variety of different innovation indicators. Another is the concentration of high talent, high skilled employees in a city. Those cities which are more LGBT inclusive, again, have higher concentrations of skills and talent for a number of reasons, and we look at that from a number of different dimensions. I mean, LGBT almost seems to play the role of a signaller to people from all different kinds of backgrounds that this is a place that will make you feel welcome, that you can plug in here and make your contribution and be economically participating. And conversely, we look at brain drain, and those cities which are not tolerant, which are not open, they lose their most talented individuals to those cities that are, and we track that as well. We present a hypothesis about the economic development of cities. And this is it. We show how cities move from being market towns, that's where it starts, mainly agricultural industries, production centres, so manufacturing starts to move in, and then up through to becoming creative and financial hubs that are globally integrated. And as this movement happens, along the bottom here, you can see the percentage, the proportion of economic activity, gross value added, accounted for by high-value services grows. And the key relationship here is with GDP per capita. The reason for showing this chart really is this is the economic strategy for pretty much every city on the planet. Every city wants to move up this curve to become a centre for high-value industries. And the evidence shows if that's what you want as a city, you have to be an environment that's open, where ideas can flow freely, where information can flow freely, where people and perspectives from lots of different backgrounds can integrate. That's what the evidence shows. If you want to be a competitive city in today's global economy, you have to be an inclusive, open for business city. That's what the report seeks to show. And so we present in here the open for business city ratings, which really is pulling together all of those metrics, all of that data, particularly in these areas, looking at city competitive and national competitiveness. So that's things like ease of doing business, digital infrastructure, etc. Also looking at the rule of law, civic freedoms, so transparency, so risk of corruption, etc. The social and cultural climate, looking at those kinds of factors, and includes, of course, overlaying LGBT inclusion. So the legal status of LGBT people in that city, the kind of attitudes towards LGBT people, and pulling all of that together, the Open for Business City ratings, it's really a way of saying how open for business is your city. And so we have published the ratings today. We've used this sort of credit rating style. If you're a AAA, if you're an A, you're a city that's open for business. If you're a B or a C, you're partially open for business. D or E cities are not open for business. On page 37 of your reports, you can see we've done that for 121 cities. And New York, Amsterdam, AAA, Cairo, Lagos, E. A lot of these kind of will conform to what we might expect. And there are some interesting positive surprises in the mix here too. So we look at cities like Guadalajara, or Medellin, or Ho Chi Minh City, or Bangalore. And these are all cities that in the ratings come up quite a bit higher than you might expect given the national context. And when you look at these cities, it turns out that they've quite proactively included inclusion as part of their own economic transformation story. And so we cover cities like that in quite a lot of depth too, because we think there's a lot of lessons to learn for other cities in that. So we published that today. Really, the idea of the ratings is simply that, for people thinking about moving to cities, global talent, it helps think through, how will I fit in this city? For companies thinking about relocation or location. It helps compare, provides a way of comparing between cities. For city policymakers, the ratings can be a way of benchmarking performance as an open for business city and help to shape policy. But really crucially, for all of us who are interested in promoting LGBT rights globally, we hope that this work can open up a new dimension, a new perspective in the global conversation about the economic case for LGBT rights. And so it's really wonderful to be here. Very much looking forward to hearing the debate. A real thank you to Sander and to Accenture for hosting us, and indeed for sponsoring the report alongside Thomson Reuters and Brunswick. So looking forward to hearing what we have to say. Cheers.
Thank you very much, John, and again compliments for a very thorough report. There's like 27 indicators that all point in the same direction, and there's hard data underneath every one of them. And thank you for confirming me being right for moving to Eindhoven, where I went to university, which was a bit of a sleepy town in the southern part of the Netherlands, to Amsterdam after I graduated. I was right. The AAA is absolutely great. Let me introduce you our panelists. Let's start with Inga Beale, the CEO of Lloyd's. Inga. Kim Hammonds, the Group Operating Officer of Deutsche Bank. Stephanie Linnartz, Global Chief Commercial Officer at Marriott International, and Zeid Al Hussein, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Every year we try to get a better panel than last year, and we have absolutely succeeded. So the bar is always high. Inga, let's maybe start with you. You're from London. AAA, does that mean everything's perfect?
Oh, AAA, I mean, isn't that fantastic? And certainly there's a lot happening in London, for sure. And it is a very vibrant place, and it does feel very inclusive and very, very diverse. And I was struck by one of the comments about this sort of cluster effect, when cities are successful and they have this cluster effect. And we've got this amazing stuff going on in London where you've got real areas that have different sectors, so that the creative sector is all clustered together, the new tech sector is all clustered together, and it's all encroaching on the traditional financial centre of London, the city, which isn't necessarily thought of as being that progressive. And I think that is a really interesting dynamic that's happening in London. However, I must say, since the vote to exit the EU, the sentiments have changed a little bit around the entire country. And unfortunately, for the LGBT community, in the last 12 months, 1 in 5 of the LGBT community have been subjected to some sort of hate crime. And that is a slightly worrying statistic. Wow. Because since that vote, there just seems to have given authority for people to, I don't know, show disdain for people who are not like them. And I think that is a slightly worrying trend. Although London still is slightly different to the rest of the country, there is a sentiment there that doesn't feel quite as positive as it would have done prior to the Brexit vote.
Right. So AAA, but a need to stick with the program, so to speak. Kim, you just joined this week, I heard, Open for Business. Mm-hmm. What was your rationale behind that?
For doing it? So Deutsche Bank, we have had a group called DB Pride for 20 years. And it's very active in 10 different countries around the world. And from our viewpoint, it's, this is an important topic that makes our business better. And so we'll continue advocating and having a presence and trying to make a difference on this topic, because again, it's a view that diversity and inclusion makes a company better and supports our customers better. So that's why it's important to us.
Excellent. Stephanie, you're a DC woman. DC got the AAA also?
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's exciting. We were, you know, it's wonderful that Washington, D.C. was AAA, a global beacon in this fantastic work that was done. Washington, D.C. is the headquarters right outside of Washington, D.C. for Marriott International, which is now the largest hotel company in the world. We're in 127 different countries, 700,000 employees, so very globally diverse customer base, associate base. And so being in DC is fantastic. It is, I think some people were surprised to see DC on the list. I think it's more culturally diverse and open than some would realize. I'm born and raised there, so I've got a special place in my heart for DC. And Marriott's actually building our global headquarters, a brand new global headquarters in the DC area, and a perfect place to find diverse talent, and for a global company, a great place for a new corporate headquarters.
So proud of DC.
Very proud of DC.
Go DC.
Well, some days. Some days I'm proud of DC, but in this regard, I'm proud of DC. Yeah.
Zeid, I mean, you travel around the world to AAA, but also to E-cities, I imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, what was your read on the report?
The report is excellent. I mean, it's really fantastic. And I was born in a double D city, so not good. I live in a AAA city in New York, in Harlem as well, which is excellent. I work in Geneva, and there's no Geneva, John, here. We need to, but I can tell you that our office is a quadruple A in the middle of Geneva, at least that, because we are so passionate about this. And when we have corporate leaders like yourself and the companies that are present here, fighting for the rights of LGBT persons around the world, some of the most heavily discriminated communities in the world, hunted down in some countries, and in organized fashion in others. It is something uplifting and inspirational to see the corporate world taking a progressive step decisively in this direction. And I think it's just wonderful that we're not just having these discussions outside the sort of Congress Center, but in the Congress Center now. And for the World Economic Forum to also begin to embrace this, I think is really good. And we have to get the message also solidly into the minds of the world leaders who do still come from double D cities or triple D or E enclosed communities. It's just unacceptable in this day and age to allow for this and to turn a blind eye to it as well. And so we have to be fighting every day. And it's also a matter of understanding this crucial point that we can't be complacent. Every time we do see progress, we do see a backlash, we do see homophobia still very present. And to root it out and to undo it, using a report that John so expertly put together, I think is the mission now for us.
Thank you. Inga, I want to pick up on your point, and we'll do a round of others can chip in. But I mean, your stat, the 1 in 5, and I mean, you're clearly seeing a bit of a backlash. What's the role of all of us in dealing with that backlash? And
well, for business leaders, I think it's all about having the courage to challenge, as you said. Now, I can remember when I took over my role 4 years ago. While I was out and people associated me with being bisexual, when it actually came to going on the sort of front page in terms of speaking openly about it, it took me 1 year into my role to have the courage to speak out about it. And now I do, but even now today, it still takes courage every single time because I'm concerned about any backlash there could be on not just me personally, but also on the Lloyd's market that I represent all around the world, and Lloyd's does business in over 200 countries. So every single time almost I get up and I talk about it, I have to have that courage to do it. And I would just encourage all business leaders, and in fact, you don't need to be a leader, it's almost incumbent upon all of us. And if the more we do it, and the more we feel connected to each other, and the more we do it together, the bigger difference we can make. But it is constant. It really is an absolutely constant battle to get out there. And in the UK at the moment, the big topic has been all about transgender. And you wouldn't believe the comments on social media, even some of the established media outlets, publications that people have been thinking of as trusted, globally minded sources of news, have been writing the most despicable things about the transgender community. So it's a constant challenge, but it takes courage. And I would just ask everybody, wherever you are in an organization, have that courage.
Kim,
Well, I would just say, for me, the learning on this whole topic of diversity and inclusion, and so obviously I represent women. So I'm the leader of the women's group at Deutsche Bank. My peer is the leader of LGBT. I'm representing, obviously, today. I think it's important that all the business leaders, and especially the business leaders that are here at the World Economic Forum, actually, when we see things that are happening that just aren't right, that we don't like. So for us, and we were going to expand our technology staff, and one of the gifts that I have is overseeing technology, is we were going to expand the staff in Cary, North Carolina. And we had plans to hire another 500 people in Cary, North Carolina. And I remember reading about the situation with the law that was being passed in Cary about bathroom rights and all of this, and just reading this and saying, this just isn't right. So we are not going to expand in Cary, North Carolina. And do we as a firm have the courage to stand up and say no? And so I talked to the CEO. I happened to be in a car riding with him one day, the day that this was happening. And I just said, this just isn't right. Like, we need to take a stand on this. But we also need to be sensitive to, we do business in many countries around the world that also, have circumstances and issues around this topic. But we need to just take a position. So we decided as a company to just take a position. We've done that kind of multiple times. And I think it's important to, when you see these things as business leaders, to just have the courage to say, what, this just isn't right. Because, unless we all stand up and start doing that, this will continue. This topic will continue to be pervasive. So I think every single day when we see these things, we need to, follow I call it the gut of doing what's right.
Yeah, I'm going to throw a little complexity here in the mix, and not specifically for any one of you, but in Accenture we have those. I mean, first of all, I'm absolutely agreeing with you. But now let's imagine your best and biggest customer was in North Carolina, and because that's, and it's not to put you on the spot, but because I'm going to ask, you feel free to chip in, because that's sort of where the tension comes in. Also in Accenture, so we have those discussions. How do you go about those? Any?
I mean, I'd echo, first of all, you said that diversity and inclusion is good for business, it's good for Marriott's business, and we believe in it to welcome people around the world. But it's easy to have values and core values on a piece of paper, but it really counts when they get tested, right? Your ethics and your values. And I think the situation in North Carolina was an example where our company got tested. We have a lot of hotels there, we have a lot of business, but our CEO also spoke out very loudly against that discriminatory legislation that was bad for our business, bad for our associates, and bad for travel, bad for the mobility of people. And so I think it takes courage, and the businesses really need to step up and speak out. And our CEO did the same thing with the legislation in Indiana, which he called madness. Which I think was a good way to describe it. It was very, and not just speaking out, once, but doing it multiple times over in his blogs and op-eds and et cetera. And it takes courage, and it may hurt your business in some regards or in some areas, but I think it's the right long-term, not only moral thing to do, but the right long-term business decision as well.
Right. Zeid, you've been working on the standards of conduct, and I think this is a theme that sort of you can read throughout the standards. Any?
When listening to the panel, I was thinking about the UN, because we are not a company, we are a global international organization, but my office is the office that is most outspoken about this, And there are other parts of the UN who are really quite silent. They should be speaking out. They should really be speaking out forcefully. I mean, especially when we look at adolescents and children who go through the stages of identity formation. And in many countries, it's a perilous experience because of the consequences you're likely to feel. And yet the rest of the UN seems to be so quiet about it. And for us, we said, okay, we're prepared to go toe-to-toe with many of these countries that are abusive, openly abusive. But you should yourselves not just worry about whether it is that you're going to have your budget squared away or whether there's going to be a diminution in terms of the support, the financial support, because ultimately it's all about principles and standing up for something. And if you start and allow for discrimination, even at the level of one individual, it becomes a slippery slope after that. So it's something, and it does require courage. Yeah. Some people have it some human rights defenders who defend the LGBT agenda, have enormous courage. The rest of us, you can build it up. You can actually become courageous even if you're not, by just acting it in the beginning, and then you suddenly fall into it. But it is something that we need to keep sort of actively stirring up. One of the points also, if you'd allow me, Sander, I was in Guatemala City a couple of months ago, and I was meeting civil society. And normally what happens is each component of the rights movement speaks on behalf of its own constituency. So the persons of disabilities are represented by the NGO that's most prominent in that field. And the same for indigenous persons, same for LGBT and so forth. What was so fascinating, what I really enjoyed, is that each community spoke on behalf of the other. So the representative of the indigenous community spoke on behalf of the LGBT. The person who's representing women's rights issues spoke on behalf of persons with disabilities. And the more we can think like that, we have our constituencies to defend, but we should also defend the rights of other constituencies. And there should be no discrimination on any grounds whatsoever. And that's what we have to keep fighting for.
And that principle we've started in Lloyd's, actually, in the insurance market in the UK, because we had all the employee resource groups focusing on their own individual areas, and they have all started to come together, and they've seen the power in that. That is very, very powerful when you get different groups speaking on behalf of others. And of course, it's because we all come from our viewpoint. It's not until you start having discussions with people who have a different experience. That's the only way we're going to have an inclusive society, isn't it? We've got to understand other people's positions, and that's been a wonderful happening.
Yeah, I would just say, again, another learning for me is that if you look at studies for decades, companies, cities, countries that are more diverse and inclusive are higher performing. And at all levels. So, everyone from the entry-level intern all the way up to the board of directors in a corporation, you're going to have better business performance. So being sensitive to creating that diverse, inclusive work environment in the corporate world, you're going to have better company performance. So that's why this is important, other than what I said before, which is just the right thing to do.
And it's not just for the individuals who may associate or think of themselves as LGBT. When we started our Pride at Lloyd's group, which was the LGBT community getting together, and we had the launch, and I can remember a guy coming up to me. He'd been working in Lloyd's for over 30 years, and he said, "Oh, Inga, this is the best day of my life here at Lloyd's." And I assumed he was going to say, "I've been able to come out as being gay today." And then he said, "My son is gay, and for the first time, I feel I can talk about my son at work." So it's the impact you can have on everybody in the organization, not just the LGBT community. Other people open up, and now suddenly he's got a weight off his shoulder. He can talk openly. He's going to be more productive. He's going to be more engaged at work.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, we need to allow employees to bring their true self to work. I mean, that's the...
What's the biggest thing holding us all back in this? Just to take a bit of a
The reptilian brain, maybe.
Yeah,
The
tell us
reptilian
more.
brain.
Yeah?
I mean, if we are the product of evolutionary biology and our genes have been modified by prejudice and bigotry over the successive centuries, and this is from our forebears, you know, we have to actively fight this fight within us. And we all recognize it, that we come to quick conclusions about someone on the basis of appearance or on the basis of what they say. And we just have to fight it every day within ourselves and recognize that there is a demon there that has to be dismantled. Those who allow the prejudice to flow and the bigotry to flow and the racism to flow are not trying to do that. They're not fighting the internal battle. And so they allow the tweets to just be a vehicle for the sort of a window into this. And this is what separates sort of progressive minds, open minds, creative minds, from those that are dull and reptilian. And we need to move away from that as human beings of the 21st century.
And there's fear. I mean,
Yeah.
I just remember myself, you know, for years I was in a same-sex relationship and I was not out at work. I was not out for years. And I look back at that time and I just think, what on earth was it? I mean, I worked in a very open company, and yet I didn't have I was fearful of something, some repercussion. And somehow we've got to help people get over that.
Yeah.
Get over the little hump. Every
Or the
time,
big hump.
every day. Yeah, well, the hump that's little, but it gets bigger every day. I think that's maybe back to the report. Is there an opportunity for business to engage with cities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the key for businesses is to partner with cities, with NGOs, with other organizations that bridge, you know, with all sorts of different communities, including the LGBT community, and that will make a big difference. I mean, you know, as an example, we've been worked with, you know, the International Gay and Lesbian Travel Association, which works globally and is one of the oldest travel associations out there, as just one example. But I think that's where businesses can work together, again, across these various organizations to move things forward. But back to your question about something that's challenging, I think for Marriott, to be very candid, it's always a balancing act when you operate in so many different countries, right? We have hotels in countries where it is against the law to be LGBT, and how do you make sure that you stay true to your core values and operate a business in a country like that stands really in many ways against everything that your company stands for? And I think we've had, you know, we kind of navigate that very carefully with making sure that our hotels are kind of like the embassy theory, right? Like inside the four walls of our hotels, how we treat people our associates, our customers, our guests is very true to our core values, while we're operating in countries that have laws on the books that are counter to our core values. I think that's really hard I know it's hard for our company to navigate.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the check-in experience that I have every now and then.
Right.
I mean,
well, that's, you know, it's a good example. We've had to train people, right?
Yeah.
Part of it is we do a lot of marketing to the LGBT community that's very inclusive, right? And #LoveTravels, and we'll show the LGBT community in a fantastic and real and authentic way. Well, then what happens at the property, right? You have to pull that through to training on the property so that when the same-sex couple comes to the front desk and has a king-size bed, you know, the front desk person doesn't say, "Do you really want that?" You know, that make sure that they, you know, no, candidly, they're able to say to all customers, you know, we have you in a king-size bed. Does that meet your needs, right? To anybody who's checking in. So, but we do a lot of training, a lot of hourly employees, of 700,000 employees, 96% of them are at a hotel. So you got to do a lot of training at the property level on cultural competency and to be inclusive, and that's really challenging too when you've got, you know, so many people to train. But it's critically important to really bring it home at the experience level at the hotel.
I think in terms of cities, what Sadiq Khan, who's the current mayor of London, is doing is reaching out to business leaders. So he's got an advisory board of business leaders, and he is really pushing the inclusion agenda. And so you can really make a difference in a city with a mayor, whoever's governing the city, when they connect with business, and we almost give them or him the support he needs to be able to go and challenge the norms. I mean, he's from a different ethnic background, so he talks a lot about that. He's now supporting women. He has given me the inspiration about panel participation. He said, I am no longer going to sit on a panel unless there's a 50-50 gender split. And so I said, right, I'm going to do that.
We could have had him here.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, but things like that. But he's getting that courage to move the city forwards because he's got all of he's connecting with the business leaders, and he's chosen specifically business leaders who are the new face of business, friendly, open, inclusive, rather than maybe the old traditional ones.
Yeah, I would just say, the LGBT community makes up, I think it's 3.7 billion market share, or market capability, and so it's a business imperative as much as it just is, and I think I've said that a couple of times, and cities, creating an environment in cities where people can thrive and be productive is extremely important. And so, again, whether it's New York City, it's Cary, it's Jacksonville, it's Australia, we've been very actively involved in advocating at kind of the right moment because we think that's important to do that. But the other, as I was doing some fact gathering before today, the other thing that was shocking is that 38% of countries are, it's criminal if you're LGBT. And I was surprised that it was so high, as I was looking at some of the facts. And so there's just a ton of work to do.
No, I think, Zeid, I'll let you comment on it because...
Yeah, no, this is, it's a very good point, and it raises another issue. And that is, yes, about that number of countries have criminalized this behavior. And of course, they can use prosecutorial discretion whether to press cases or not. So you could have a benign environment, or you could have a very hostile environment. I think what's important for companies to do is to sort of set a threshold. Because if you have an employee who's arrested and prosecuted, does the company defend that employee? Yeah. Now, the company may say, look, we have no liability, they knew that these are the laws of the country and so forth, but the morale of the rest of the employees must just plummet because they realize the company doesn't stand up for its employees. Yeah. And so the leadership of the company must take a position at some point. You don't want to be the frog in the pot that just begins to see one employee, 2, 3, and then at what stage are you going to speak? And when it becomes a senior sales executive who's traveling in the region. And so, on principle, these are hard decisions, but they have to be taken. And when they're taken in the right way, the sense of liberation that you've stood up for your employees, no matter what the cost ultimately is, it has to provide some sort of sense of stimulation because it will have an effect on the country. Yeah. I can tell you, having represented a country that's not, sort of open for business, so to speak, when it comes to acceptance of LGBTI persons, when you see companies sort of put pressure on the government, it has an effect. It has an effect, and companies need to realize this.
Yeah, so for anyone who runs into Modi this week, 377 off the table.
It's a target-rich environment.
Absolutely true. Anthony, I think we're going to open it up for some questions from the audience. I see a hand there in the back.
Hi, Justin Blake from Edelman. I just want to pick up on the point that you finished with, and maybe, John, this is a question for you. The ability for multinationals to put pressure on governments where they're operating and they're persecuting LGBT, they have restrictions against LGBT. John, I'm curious, when you did the research and looked at all the different metrics for the cities, are there insights when you look at the bottom of the ratings or even in the middle of the ratings that could kind of add to this dialogue that we've been having over the years here at Davos over what can multinationals be doing about this issue?
Is it okay if I take that?
Yeah, sure.
I think that the simple answer to that, because there are many non-simple answers to that question, is is in the local business community.
Yeah.
So many of the conversations that we've been having in the couple of years since we launched Open for Business have been with leaders in countries, like the countries that you're mentioning. And we often find a surprising level of understanding of the economic arguments and of support for inclusion amongst very senior leaders in the local business community. Now, they might not currently have quite the level of motivation or feel empowered to start having those conversations and making that case to policymakers, but for us it's the single biggest source of optimism is that support is latent but quite clear amongst senior leaders in countries like this. And so maybe a thing we could all do is be connecting with those leaders in those countries.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from the audience?
Great report. Jerry Cachodi from A.T. Kearney. Data shines a light on so many things. I was really struck at the cadre of AAA cities. There was one exception you noted in the report, which was Singapore. And I'm wondering, what do you see as the role of the business community in maybe changing something that's an exception like that, where you've got a city that's otherwise creative, inclusive, I've been to Singapore many times, never felt threatened there, but still has laws on the books and still has an environment that is superficially challenging. So I'm hesitant to reward a place like that, but what can we do to say, hey, look, we recognize what you're good at, but there's still a black mark that you've got to solve. What's the role of the business community in kind of helping the best even get better?
Well, we've got, 3 years ago, we had a first dive-in festival, we call it. And it's basically a celebration of diversity and inclusion. And the first time we ran it in London, I was actually really worried because I was taking the Lloyd's building, and the Lloyd's market is a very traditional market, and I was putting coloured banners and posters all over the building, and I was really worried about the negative impact. However, it went down so well that the next year we went global. And then last year we went even more global. We had 92 events all happening in the same week across 17 different countries, all about different types of diversity and inclusion. And Singapore, a group in Singapore said, we're going to have an LGBT event. And I said, oh, are you? And they said, yes, we can do it. And they did it, and there were no negative repercussions. And it was done in a non-confrontational way. It was done in a celebration. And that's how we've tried to have the dialogue open up in different countries. And we had events in Brazil, in South Africa. We really went global. But it was done about celebrating rather than confronting. And I think maybe that's one way of doing it. Yeah. Back to reward them, but also try and do it in a celebratory way. Say, look how great it can be, rather than confrontational. And that's how we've done it. Maybe it's a bit cowardice, but that's how we've approached it. Certainly in Singapore.
Many,
Singapore?
Well, there are many techniques one can employ to try. I like this celebratory route. I think that's excellent. We can also look at cases where people, nationals of a country, are discriminated in other communities, and then point out to them, just as they find it egregious that their own nationals, their own expatriate community in country X, Y, and Z are the object of harassment and discrimination, well, then they should understand that that applies to their LGBT community within country. And we try and use any means available to lean on them and convince them. And but where the celebratory sort of route yields dividends, then I think it should be pursued. And I find it's very intriguing and something we need to support.
Sorry, we'll get to you next, Beth.
Thank you. My name is David Pressman, and until recently I served as the United States Ambassador to the United Nations for Political Affairs. One of the things that struck me, and I'd be interested in your reaction, is that in terms of engaging multinationals and this relates to the previous question, to actually engage politically with foreign leaders with respect to policies or laws that are pending in their jurisdiction, we've made enormous progress with respect to internal-facing reforms, employee-facing reforms. But when you actually have a situation, whether it's in Nigeria, in Kenya, and you call a government or whoever calls your office and says, hey, can you pick up the phone and call the president, call the speaker, call whoever it is and say, this is bad for business, I think we're still at a point where the overwhelming response from the business community is the way we contribute is by promoting rule of law and transparency through our commerce. We don't engage in the politics. And the North Carolina example is an interesting one because in the United States, it's an exception. In the United States, we obviously have a relatively empowered LGBT political constituency. But in those jurisdictions where that doesn't exist, I'd be interested in your perspective on how we do better in getting corporations to engage at political levels to seek reform.
I mean, from my vantage point, it's extremely important. So, you know, what's the method to actually do that? Do you do that through the politicians? Do the countries that are not in the 38% list that I mentioned become, you know, create advisory groups of politically to companies that support this effort, that have been very vocal? You know, many companies around the world, including in Asia, have been extremely vocal about supporting diversity and inclusion. And I think actually, you know, someone in your seat could actually take what's the initiative that you could take in the sphere of influence that you have to make a difference on the topic. And I think it is our responsibility as executives of these companies to, you know, reach out to the political person that we may or may not know and communicate our stand on these topics. But I think it kind of goes both ways as well, which is the political environment as well as the corporations have to work together to address this topic.
And I think from a business leader's perspective, of course, we don't want to become overly political. So for us, there would be it's got to have a positive impact on the bottom line. So it's got to be increasing your profits. And then I think you've got a really valid case to go and, you know, lobby governments around the issue. And I know there are lots of stats out there and research that's been done to show that the more inclusive you are, the better it is for business. And that's how we would possibly use it. But just to go in a political angle is really challenging, I think, for business.
One last question from Beth. Oh, sorry, we'll take Beth first and then we'll take you as the last.
Great, thanks, Sander. Just quickly, I want to go back, Inga, to the London situation because I worry that it's maybe a front runner to something we might be seeing, which the 1 in 5, you've got an overly supportive mayor, you've got great business leaders, yet you've got a media that's getting more and more aggressive. You know, you and Stephanie both mentioned, you know, courage is necessary, but it's also you have to evaluate the risks to business. Just perspective on the London situation of why is that happening?
Right, so the stats are for the UK as a whole, and therefore not necessarily London. I would say London is a little bit different, but it still is also happening in London. But it's across the entire UK, this sentiment. And I don't know, it's almost as though because of this feeling that people haven't been included in the past, all types of people, somehow, and I don't know whether it was really the Brexit vote or whether there's all the other things that are going on with the rise in populism, but the Brexit vote triggered a whole host of hate activities. Now, it goes beyond the LGBT community. I have a guy who, in the first week following the Brexit vote, he and his wife, they're from another country in Europe. They've been living in the UK for years. For the first time, they were walking their dog along the river, and they get verbally abused and told to get back to their country. The first time ever they've experienced it. So it triggered a whole host. Somehow it let these demons out of people. So it goes way beyond the LGBT community, but those statistics for the LGBT community are horrific. And we also know that about 25% of the homeless people, which is a growing issue in the UK as well, are from the LGBT community.
One last question.
My name is Narcia Beliciano, and I'm Director of Corporate Responsibility for Relics Group. One of our business units is Reed Exhibitions, and I should say that we are signatory to Open for Business, is going to be having the first travel show, which is called Proud Experiences, running in June of this year. So there's work that we can do within our you know, for what we do for our bread. And then there are the LGBT working groups, and there's the special one-off activities. There's the training that we can do for our employees. But what else should we be doing day in and day out to create a culture of inclusion? Are we missing something that we should be focusing on?
I think that's a perfect question to just make a round of. What's the one thing that we could be doing? We could be doing more. It's a perfect question to end. Inga. Sorry, or Zeid.
Shall I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was discussing this with Dan Bross yesterday. It seems that most companies, if maybe not, you could say maybe all companies, need to do human rights impact assessments throughout their complete, you know, all the supply chains up and down the company. And then once you've mapped out your exposure, the gaps, the blind spots, and you see where you need to do work, then heavy investment by the leadership of the company. I mean, as we see Sander, you know, outstanding leader in this field, you begin to change the character and the image and the reputation if the reputation was suffering damage in the past. And so to do a complete human rights impact assessment, I think is something that needs to be done by most companies.
Yeah. No, I've just thought of something that we could do. And the inspiration came from what happened in the UK in 2016, which was an investigation into the lack of women in financial services and senior roles. And the government commissioned this. There was a charter produced, launched by the Bank of England, so serious stuff, and they asked financial services firms to sign up to this charter. And importantly, signing up to this charter meant setting targets for women at the top and publicly declaring those targets and then monitoring and reporting against them and impacting executive pay if they don't hit them. So if we've now got this United Nations Code of Conduct, whatever we're calling it, Standards of Business, Standards of Conduct for the LGBT community, that is an idea that you can actually get businesses to sign up, start to have targets, publicly report against them, and affect executive pay.
And Cisco yesterday joined the 47 companies that had already signed up, so we're moving slowly upward.
You know, I just to build on that, you know, leading by example is key, and I think having measurable targets that you're held accountable for is an important part of it. You know, at Marriott, we're making sure too that we think about this holistically, targets not just around associates and training, but around consumers and around our hotel ownership, because we manage and franchise on behalf of others, on our supply chain and our vendors. Are we being inclusive there, including in the LGBT community? But we have a subcommittee of our board that we have a scorecard every quarter where my boss, our CEO, and we each have a component of it. We have to report out to our board on how are we doing against various segments, including the LGBT segment, how are we doing against various stakeholder groups, and it is part of our compensation, and it is a big focus area. So this idea of, you know, what gets measured gets done and has focus, there is a real degree of truth to that.
Yeah, I would I totally echo what everyone has said so far. You know, one of the things that I'm really proud of about Deutsche Bank is we've had a perfect score for 15 years on the Human Rights Equality Index. And we're just behind one other bank, global bank, which I won't name. But I think that it's education, training, you know, we have what's called an allies. You know, are you an ally of DB Pride? Are you an ally in support of DB Go, which is the women's initiative group? I think it's education, training, measuring, but also what I said before, which is taking a stand for making your business better. And this topic of diversity and inclusion, not being discriminatory, creating a good work environment for your employees, creating a company where your customers actually trust you and want to work with you and you have the right kind of ethical ethos is important. And And this is an important topic. I'd like to see the diversity and inclusion topic get more pronounced actually in the Congress Center.
Yeah,
and we
exactly.
were talking about that earlier. This is a topic that makes companies better, and it'll make the world better.
Yeah.
No, I think that would be absolutely the right thing to do. I mean, because from this panel, I mean, it's clear, thanks to Open for Business, there is a very clear case for LGBT inclusiveness in cities and in business. I mean, there's a dialogue to be had between business and cities, and in that dialogue, businesses, and you all said it very well, need to stand by their values, speak up, have the courage to speak up, and not be the frog in the pot.
Not be the frog in the pot.
Thank you very much, panel. Thank you, Inga. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Hussein.